The winter that year arrived early, laying a hard crust of snow over the city and sealing every sound beneath it. General Sergei Ivanovich Morozov watched the courtyard from his apartment window as the first streetlights flickered on, their yellow halos trembling in the cold. He had commanded divisions, buried friends, and signed orders that sent men into darkness, yet nothing unsettled him like waiting for his daughter to come home. Anna was late. He checked his watch again, an old habit from years when minutes meant lives. She was 22, a student of literature, her head filled with poems and impossible kindness. She laughed too easily, trusted too much. He had tried to teach her caution without breaking her spirit. That evening she had gone to the library, then planned to meet a friend for tea. It was ordinary. It was safe. That was what he told himself. The phone rang. The sound sliced the silence like a blade. He lifted the receiver, already knowing the world had shifted. A man's voice, strained and hurried, asked if he was Anna's father. There had been an incident. She was alive. She was at the hospital. He should come immediately. The drive was a blur of red lights and clenched teeth. He did not remember parking. Inside the hospital, the smell of disinfectant burned his throat. A nurse led him down a corridor that seemed to stretch and bend, as if testing how far grief could travel. Anna lay on the bed, small beneath the white sheet. Her face was pale, her eyes open but distant, as if she were looking through him at something only she could see. He took her hand. It was cold. "Papa," she whispered, and that single word broke something inside him that had survived wars. The doctor spoke quietly, choosing words like stepping stones over a chasm. There had been an assault. Multiple attackers. She had fought. She had survived. The investigation had begun. He nodded, absorbing nothing. All he could see were the bruises blooming along her wrists, the tremor in her fingers as she clutched his. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, tears sliding down into her hair. "I tried to get away." He leaned close, his forehead touching hers. "You did nothing wrong," he said, each word pressed into her like a vow. Nothing. In the days that followed, the city continued as if nothing had happened. Trams rattled. People queued for bread. Snow fell and melted and fell again. For Sergei, time narrowed to hospital visits, police interviews, and the sound of Anna crying in her sleep. The investigators were polite. They knew who he was. They promised diligence. They took statements, collected descriptions that blurred into shadows and smells and fear. Anna struggled to speak, her voice cracking when she tried. Each retelling cost her something precious. Weeks passed. One suspect was questioned and released. Another disappeared. Evidence was insufficient. Witnesses unreliable. The words stacked up like sandbags, a defense against responsibility. One evening, Anna asked him to sit beside her bed. She looked thinner, older. "Papa," she said, staring at the wall. "They won't be punished." He wanted to argue, to reassure her with the faith he no longer possessed. Instead, he said nothing. Silence settled between them, heavy and honest. That night, he opened the drawer where he kept old medals and photographs. Faces stared back at him, men who had trusted him absolutely. He remembered the weight of command, the clarity that came when choices were terrible but necessary. He remembered what it felt like to act. The next morning, he requested his retirement papers. Freedom came quietly. No ceremony, no speeches, just an empty office and a final salute. He walked out into the cold with a sense of purpose that frightened him with its calm. He began with listening. In dim kitchens and crowded apartments, he spoke to men who knew the streets better than any map. He did not threaten. He did not boast. He asked questions and paid for answers with favors owed and promises kept. Names surfaced, whispered first, then spoken aloud. A group of young men, known for violence, protected by connections and indifference. He followed them at a distance, learning their habits. Where they drank, where they laughed, where they felt untouchable. At night, he returned home to Anna, who watched him with eyes that searched for something she could not name. "You're tired," she said once, touching his sleeve. "What are you doing?" "Trying to remember who I am," he replied. The first confrontation happened on a frozen riverbank. Two of them stood smoking, their breath clouds in the dark. Sergei stepped out of the shadows, his voice steady. He spoke Anna's name. One laughed. The other reached for something in his pocket. What followed was swift and brutal, but not chaotic. Years of training guided his hands. He disarmed, restrained, incapacitated. He did not kill. He left them bruised and terrified, with a message carved into their understanding rather than their skin. He wanted them to remember. Word spread. Fear changed the geometry of the city. Men who had walked with swagger now glanced over their shoulders. One turned himself in, confessing to crimes beyond Anna's. Another fled. Sergei documented everything. Dates, places, confessions extracted without torture, only the pressure of certainty. He sent anonymous packets to journalists, to prosecutors who still believed in consequences. Cases reopened. Patterns emerged. Anna sensed the shift. The nightmares lessened. She began to walk outside again, holding her coat closed against the cold. One afternoon, she said, "I feel like the air is changing." He nodded. "It is." The retaliation came as a whisper of warning too late. A car slowed near their building. A brick shattered the window. A note followed, crude and threatening. Sergei read it without blinking, then folded it neatly and burned it in the sink. That night, he moved Anna to a friend's apartment. She protested, fear flaring. "I don't want to run," she said. "You're not running," he replied. "You're living." The final man remained, the one who had led, whose laughter had echoed loudest in the dark. Sergei tracked him to an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city, a place where promises had rusted and collapsed. Snow sifted through broken windows. They faced each other amid old machines. The man sneered, masking fear with bravado. "You think you're a hero," he said. "You think this fixes her." Sergei felt the weight of the question. He thought of Anna's trembling hands, her brave attempts at normalcy. He thought of justice delayed until it rotted. "No," he said softly. "I think this stops you." He did not strike first. He spoke. He made the man recount every choice, every moment he had mistaken cruelty for power. When the police arrived, tipped by an envelope mailed hours earlier, they found a man broken by his own words, ready to confess to everything. The trial was long and public. Names were named, networks exposed. Some officials fell with them. Anna testified once, her voice steady, her eyes clear. Sergei sat behind her, hands folded, heart pounding with pride and sorrow. Sentences were handed down. They were imperfect. They always were. But they were real. In the spring, Anna returned to the university. She carried books again, stopped for tea with friends. Some days were still hard. Healing was not a straight road. Sergei walked beside her, learning to be a father without armor. One evening, they stood by the river as ice broke apart and drifted away. "Papa," she said, "I know what you did." He waited. "I don't know if it was right," she continued. "But I know why." He took her hand, feeling warmth where once there had been only cold. "I would do it again," he said, then corrected himself. "No, I would choose a world where I never had to." She leaned into him. The city hummed behind them, scarred and alive. The river carried the broken ice toward open water, and Sergei understood that revenge had not saved his daughter. Love had, and the courage to refuse silence.